What patterns do you see most often when growth is making the founder the bottleneck?
So typically I see three patterns that come up most often. The first one I like to call return loop or liken it to like a game of tennis. And that's when decisions just keep landing back on the founder side. And, the idea with tennis is, a really good game. It should be going back and forth. The second one is accountability. And that's when everyone in theory knows who's responsible for what. But in practice, it's still routing back to the founder. And then the third one is the compensating team. And this is generally what we see after a while of the founder bottleneck. And that team is very good at working around the founder. They are working around the gap instead of actually naming the gap. And so instead of using their own strengths or using what they know best, they're starting to hold back and compensating for what the system is actually requiring them to do.
Curious if any of the other panelists have seen similar patterns or anything that they've observed when they see founders becoming the bottleneck.
I think it comes back to the root of what we've already begun discussing is this inability to delegate, which sometimes may show up or feel like it's perfectionism or it's indecision. But I think at the core of it all is just a lack of trust in others, because logically one might know that if you're able to delegate task A, B, and C, you can scale and go significantly faster. But if the person you delegate to is only going to do 80% of the job that you would be able to do, that feels threatening. You might see it as a threat to your role, your standards, and you can get so lost in that little problem, you forget to see that your big vision requires you to scale and have other individuals working with you to go after the collective goal.
The other thing that I've seen is a total misunderstanding of the job of a CEO. I was with one leadership team and the CEO said to his team, "Hey, my job is to help all of you. Just tell me what you need." And I said, "My God, that's not your job. Your job is not to do everybody else's job. That is not scalable. There is a job of a CEO. The CEO is the chief visionary, is in charge of strategy. I believe the CEO owns culture. The CEO is an ambassador internal in the organization, ambassador external to the organization. CEO's job is to build a great leadership team. There's a specific job of a CEO. And I think for a lot of early on founders and CEOs, they don't quite understand what their job is. So they have a tendency to help everybody else and dig into everybody else's job. And that's just not scalable. And that drives, just being real tired and burnt out at the end of the day.
I wonder, Kim, if that goes back to kind of what you said, one of the patterns you observed of you've got a team, they know their responsibilities, but things keep coming back to the CEO. I wonder if what Paul mentioned too of, the trust of getting something done 80%, maybe that's good enough impacts that. I'd love to hear your thoughts more on, that specific pattern and maybe some strategies that you share to help people get out of that.
I definitely think that's part of it. I also think the flip side, I think the founder can think, well, it's just faster if I do it this time. It will take me too long to train somebody to do it, when in reality, sometimes you need to slow down a little bit to train somebody to do it. One of the things that I have somebody do is think about what's one decision recently, this week, yesterday, today, that came back that shouldn't have come back to you. And what would have had to be true for that decision to be made without you? And within that is the gap. And that's the best place to start, because it's always going to come down to clarity, capability, or trust. So somebody wasn't clear on what they needed to do. They aren't capable, there's a skill gap perhaps, or they're simply not trusting that they'll be able to do it without them.
Harley, I'll add something too, based on what Mike said. Sometimes I've had to ask my clients point blank, are you the best person to be the CEO? Because the skill set required to get a company off the ground and running is night and day different versus, just like Mike described, the skill set required to paint the picture, build the culture, and set everybody else up for success. And more often than not, it becomes an ego issue, an identity threat when someone has founded and started this great company, this great movement, and they're not the best person to keep it moving in that direction, because because maybe, for example, they love being in the weeds of the tactical hands-on building, that they're neglecting the vision, the culture building, and the leadership. So sometimes it's an honest conversation that's required with a mentor, a coach, somebody you trust, and it's really putting the right person in that seat. And maybe that role changes to president, director of X, Y, and Z. But if you can let go of the ego or that need for validation and attention that typically comes with that CEO label, you can actually get the movement or the business to scale well beyond the original intention.
That reminds me of an article that I've sent to multiple founders, and I'll have to remember, I think where it came from, but do you want to be a founder or do you want to be the king? And there's usually, if ego and status, if that's the most important thing, then those are, you can make the choice. It's your company.